Lilias, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Janice. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. All right, let's dive right in. First off, let's talk about your background. Who are you and how did you get into this world of personal finance?
I'm Lilias Folkes John, better known as Your Financial Stylist. I've been teaching personal finance since 2008.
You're an OG.
OG, long time. And my parents, they're immigrants. I was born here, but my mom is from the Caribbean. She's from Barbados, and my dad is Panamanian. So I'm Afro-Latina. And I got into personal finance from making a lot of financial mistakes. I mean, most Latin households, most Caribbean households, you get told no a lot when it comes to things that you want to buy, right?
With no explanation.
Right. Like you've got enough undershirts, you've got shirts, you've got pants, you've got shoes, you don't need anything else. And so I grew up feeling like I was being deprived. Even though I was born in America, I felt like I was being deprived from like the American teenage experience. And so when I turned 18, I received an inheritance from my grandparents and I went berserk.
Oh, how much was it?
So $66,000.
And how old were you?
19.
Girl, recipe for disaster.
It felt like $1 million to me. Okay. Like I tell people that number now and they're like, that's nothing. And I'm like, at 19, it felt like $1 million. So I did some smart things. I paid for 2 semesters of college. I went to the mall. I was being ridiculous. Like I would go and I moved off campus. So I went to Hofstra University in Long Island and I would sleep over at my friend's dorm after I moved off campus and bring nothing with me. And in the morning, I would get up and I would go to Roosevelt Field and I would buy everything new down to my underwear. Literally, I was ridiculous. And always had to buy like a Ralph Lauren towel and washcloth, like that level of ridiculousness. And funny enough, you want to talk about irony, I was working at the bank.
I love that.
In Hempstead. So really ridiculous. Working at the bank, a lot of people may think like, how can you make these bad decisions working at a bank? Well, they don't teach you financial literacy even when you work at the bank.
Facts. I worked as a bank teller too, and I didn't learn shit about money until way later.
There you go. And then New York, late 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot of bottles being popped. Literally. Like I spent a lot of time in Mars 2112. That's all I have to say. So,
oh my God, I remember that place. Jesus. Girl, you are dating us. You are aging us.
But they were the times. Those were the times. So I had this money for a while, right? Like, so it took 3 years before it all ran out, which even, again, I tell people that now and they're like, I spent 50,000 in 2 months, or I spent 600. I just listened to one on somebody else's podcast, 600,000 in 6 months.
Yeah. I think those were our friends at the price of avocado toast, the 600K. I remember them telling me about that inheritance. Yeah.
Yeah. So craziness, right? But 3 years, ran out of money and realized by now I'm 21, 22, and I'm disappointed in myself. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, there has to be a way to rebuild this money. And so I sat down and I got a subscription to Money Magazine. I started reading everything I could get my hands on in terms of personal finance so that I could rebuild my own financial life. And I read Susie Orman's Young, Fabulous, and Broke.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I was working at a different bank now. And the guy who sat behind me was reading this book on how to clean up your credit. And he shared it with me. And I went to the photocopier, right? I went to the copy machine and I made photocopies of the pages of how to clean up your credit. And I sat down and I fixed my credit. It took me over a year. My credit score was like a 522 and I got it to a 750. And then really was like, oh, I can fix my financial life. Like there's a solution for this and it's on me. It's in my management of what I receive. And I started teaching like my family and friends. And then in 2008, that's when I was like, wait, there's a way for me to do this for other people outside of who I just know and love. And it's a very interesting story, actually. So I was working at the time for Columbia University in New York. And they were expanding their campus. And this was the very early beginnings. They had purchased a bunch of land in the 90s. The land fell into, like, the buildings fell into blight, and they decided they were going to expand into Harlem. And the people of West Harlem, particularly, there's a huge Mitchell-Lama property on like 130th and Broadway. They were pissed. And I was the owner's rep for the business school, having to be a part of the problem, bringing the university into West Harlem. And I would go to public meetings and community meetings, and I mean, they hated us. And I was like, man, but if the people understood that they're not victims, like, you have options. Yes, we're worried about gentrification, and you're worried about prices going up, and you're worried about being pushed out of your property. But if I can teach you about personal finance, you'll understand that you have choices and you can make decisions. You can team up with everyone in your building, and you can buy the building so no one can push you out. So while I was a part of the problem by day, representing the university and leading this $500 million real estate project by day, on the weekends, I was teaching the community how to manage their money for free.
And what did that look like?
It was going to local community centers, inviting members of the community onto Columbia's campus to teach them about money. Here's what you need to know about budgeting. Here's what you need to understand about saving. Do you know that saving is not the be all end all, right? Like, there's this thing out there called investing. And it was tough because people were very skeptical of coming to the university. So I eventually had to stop teaching at the university and go to the community. I was doing this under a pen name because if they knew that I was the same person bringing the university into the neighborhood, no one would have trusted me, right? Like, It would not have worked. So I was teaching under a name called Carrie Pink. That was my brand name back in the day. And I had to because my name was in the paper as a part of this project. So just to keep the separation. And I did that for a number of years. I mean, just going to the local Boys and Girls Club, anywhere where they would accept me to come in and teach personal finance, I went. And I saw a lot of people have the opportunity. I started teaching like a 10-month long program where we met once a month for like 3 to 4 hours at a time. And we would just deep dive into personal finance topic. And I have students who came out of that program who paid off all their debt, who saved money for the first time in their lives, who didn't even care about the university encroaching into Harlem anymore because they're like, I'm buying a condo in New Jersey. I'm moving to Westchester. You know, they were able to make different decisions for their lives that wasn't based around someone else doing something to them.
Yeah, you get out of that victim mentality when you realize how much potential power you can harness yourself.
Yeah, it was an amazing, amazing time.
That's incredible. So, I have to think also the fact that you were able to have such an impact has a lot to do with the fact that you look like someone who comes from the community that you're trying to serve, and I don't think enough people realize like how powerful that alone can be when you feel like you can relate to someone who wants to have this conversation with you versus like some stuffy corporate finance guy who walks into your job and wants to like talk about finances. You're just like, what? You have nothing in common with me, sir.
Yeah, well, and I think that all of that rolls in, right? The fact that I'm the child of immigrants, I'm a first generation American. Like, my parents came here for opportunity. Like, all of that makes my experience working with people, it gives them that relatability, right? The fact that I've made all these money mistakes and I blew money and I felt deprived and I had these like bad relationship with money because I looked at it as a certain way. That definitely, absolutely, that impacts the fact that I'm a woman, the fact that I'm a woman of color, like all of that plays into whether someone is going to listen to me when I start talking to them about their money.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important for us to realize like how those different intersections can impact your money, right? We know the difference between white women and Black women when it comes to earning. We know the difference between white families and Black families when it comes to the amount of wealth that they have. And so for us to think that we're all starting from an equal playing field is my biggest problem with personal finance in general, is just this like bootstrap mentality where a lot of folks are just very ignorant to the idea that where you come from, your background, all of that has a direct impact on your ability to access wealth, and it can make things much more difficult, even if we all have the same starting information.
Definitely, that's true. I think when we start talking about the biblical part of finance, you start to realize while it's true, we don't all have the same opportunity and we don't all have the same playing field. What is for me will be mine. And so if I believe that from a faith perspective, it doesn't matter if somebody else has more because they look different, because they had a head start. What God has for me is for me. And so as I continue to move on in my own journey, right, and teaching people sort of that same, like, listen, we know, right? We can't avoid the reality or the statistics that say we don't have this equal playing field. We know that. But what can we do about that right now? All we can do is work on ourselves individually and give ourselves the option to learn about personal finance, to set ourselves up for opportunity, to connect with others who are trying to do the same thing and advance in the same way. So it may not ever be equal in the way that ideally we would like to see things become. That may not ever happen. But if it doesn't, how can I still get to a place where I'm achieving what's meant for me to achieve and then sharing what I know with the next person who may not have had the information I have or the experience? Because I think for me, I didn't have the information, but I had the experience that made me sit back and say, there's got to be more. There has to be another option.
Yeah, let's talk more about the biblical financial principles that you teach your clients, because I have found that religion can have a big role in how we feel about wealth and money. You know, that's one of the things that I talk about in my book, Financially Lit. It's the idea of like prosperity gospel and poverty gospel, and like how sometimes based on your religious upbringing, you can potentially see wealth as like a negative thing, as something that leads to greed and gluttony, and it's something that you shouldn't want. And on the flip side, you know, there's folks who have a different perspective on that. So what's your take on like the ties between religion and finance?
First, I would say anyone who is a Christian, I can only speak about the Christian experience. If you're a Christian and you read your Bible for yourself, you will learn exactly how God feels about money and wealth. God tells us in his word that he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He's not broke. So why are we down here believing that God wants us to be poor? That is absolutely ridiculous. But there are denominations or sects of religion that make people believe that to be more holy, they have to be pious and pitiful and poor. And that somehow makes them closer to God. That is not true. Now, it's not a prosperity gospel either, where we should be chasing wealth. God tells us very clearly, I know what you need before you ask me. And the bare minimum things that you need are food, clothes, water, and shelter. And so I'm going to provide those for you at a bare minimum. You should not worry about those things because even unbelievers have to secure that for themselves. And you are supposed to be worried about things bigger and higher than the basics. That's Bible. So beyond that, if we know that he's going to take care of us on our basic level, then what is our perspective with money supposed to be biblically? It's supposed to be a tool for us. It's a tool. And because God gives us the ability to make wealth, he tells us that in the word. It's from him that we're able to make wealth. It's what we do with it when we get it. Do we have the right posture in our hearts? Do we get wealth and then hoard it for ourselves? Or do we understand that the more he gives us, the more we can give? And we'll always be taken care of.
You know, I think that makes a lot of sense. And even if you're not a religious person, I think this feeds back into the idea of how much your mindset is related to what your money's actually doing. Because there's folks that believe in abundance and manifestation and affirmations and all those things. And I think it's sort of the same thing where it's like, you're not actually going to be able to accomplish what you want to do financially until you wrap your mind around your potential. You get out of this idea that there is not enough, right? The scarcity mindset. You realize that you have the power to create the life that you want, regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I'm teaching a year-long stewardship program right now. So it's biblical finance and financial literacy combined. So we read a scripture last night that said, even the unbeliever can be better at negotiating deals and doing business than those who are in the kingdom of God. And it's like an eye opener because a lot of people who are Christians or who are in religion think somehow not only is money off the table to them, but business is off the table. And they miss the opportunity they have to really serve God in a bigger way and do more with their finances. Because if I am a business owner, I now have the opportunity to change someone else's livelihood. I have the opportunity to give somebody a job. I have the opportunity to elevate somebody into a higher position than maybe they could get in corporate America. How do I change my perspective on money and business and know that that's not something that is off limits when it comes to my faith? And so those who do believe in manifestations or affirmations, they've subscribed to a way of thinking that empowers them to do more. Mindset for money as a Christian is still the foundation. You still have to have the right mindset to do well with finances, even from a biblical perspective.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of those barriers that exist, especially for communities of color, immigrant communities. What are some of those common themes that you have seen as a money coach who's been doing this for a very long time that keep people maybe stuck where they are versus where they could be?
I heard someone say the other day, no, but my mom told me we're always going to rob Peter to pay Paul.
Oh, God.
What? Absolutely no. I've heard people, even just their own self-limiting beliefs, like, but no, I'm an immigrant myself. I wasn't born here. These type of opportunities don't exist for me because I'm not American. And you're kind of like, what? No, like, let's just erase that. Like, they think that that means they're never going to buy a house. They're going to rent forever. That so many things are out of their reach, that investing, there are still people who believe that investing is for rich white people. You're kind of like, no, like the landscape has changed, especially now with fractional shares. Like, come on, anybody is welcome. You know, I remember when you could not even start an investment account if you didn't have $2,500 cash. So there are a lot of self-limiting beliefs. There are a lot of stereotypes that people just put on themselves because of their race, because of their gender, because of their citizenship. And none of it is true, right? If I could just have a conversation with all the people who believe that and just show them like, no, you have the opportunity. Here's step one. It would change the course of so many people's lives.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What is step one? Because for somebody who wants to make those changes, I think figuring out what that step one is usually like the hardest thing because they're so used to operating in a particular way that when you think about like all the things you may have to change in order to get out of debt or start investing or buy your first home, it can feel so overwhelming that you just freeze because you don't even know what to do. So what would you say most people's first step should be?
I know a lot of people focus on budget as like the first step, like build a budget, understand where your money is going. But I think it goes even before the budget. You have to know your why. What's the why? Why do I want to change my relationship with money? Why do I want to get out of debt? What do I want to see in my life that's different than today? And that's really the setup, because if you don't have a bigger why attached to these changes, you're not going to commit to them. It's kind of like dieting and going to the gym on January 1st, right? We all talk a good game. We talk real good. And then February, the gym is empty. Why? Because we didn't tie it to something bigger than just the lip service. So I always start, one, identifying what's your current financial style, right? Where did it come from? What did you see with your family? What are your current habits and behaviors? Like, these are the things that people have to confront first. And most people know their problem. They know their financial issues. They just don't know how to fix them. And so in my workbook, I have a workbook that's all about biblical finance. It's 6 biblical lessons plus financial lessons to start that process of managing your money God's way. And in each chapter, at the end of each chapter, I'm asking people to review what they learned. What did you learn about yourself? What are your triggers? We talked about different spending triggers in chapter 2. Which ones are yours? And how are you going to replace that with something new? Because if you don't equip people with just the tools to identify their own downfalls and then give them opportunities to create their own solutions, it's not going to stick.
It's always fascinating to me how much the lack of like talk or connection between your mindset and what you do with your money is in like mainstream personal finance books and content. You know, one of the things that people have brought up to me time and time again is like how pervasive mental health issues are in our community, but it's also like the thing that we want to ignore, even though it has like so much impact on how we operate. So for folks who might feel like a stigma about even talking about the trauma that they experience around money and what they experience as kids, and, you know, if you come from poverty, you come from a situation where you saw money as being an area of conflict, naturally, it's going to make you be afraid of it. It's going to make you feel like, oh, if I talk about money with my partner, we're going to fight. So I'm going to ignore it. But then that just creates its own set of issues. So what advice would you give to folks who are like just afraid to kind of go down that rabbit hole of discovering what those triggers may stem from?
You know, Janice, honestly, I think the way we solve for some of this is conversations like this right here. People like you and me who have a comfort talking about money and what we went through with money, that's what's going to make those who listen to your podcast or those who visit my platform, that's what's going to make them more comfortable talking about the trauma they went through with money. Because if you don't know or trust anyone to talk about what you saw with money, you're not going to know how to fix it. And you need that safe space. Like I share all the time, right? Like, here's what I did. I tell people all the time, I did all the things. I blew an inheritance. I filed bankruptcy. My car got repossessed. I've been through all the things. And when you're able to share that, and I did some of those things, right? Like my car got repossessed because I made a bad decision with a boyfriend and I didn't know how to say no. So when you are comfortable talking about money with other people, it gives them the comfort to talk back to you. I think it's hard to take that initial step, right? Because there's a lot of shame and guilt around bad decisions with money. And what people need to know is there is no one who hasn't made a financial mistake, including your favorite personal finance creator, podcaster, educator, or coach.
Facts. And if they deny it, they are a fraud. And you should
That's
probably stay
it.
far, far away from them.
Run.
Yes. All right. So you're a mom of 6, which is just like, wow, round of applause. Like, I don't even understand that, how that works. But we have a lot of moms that listen to the show. And I think one of the common themes that I've seen is this need or this inherent drive to self-sacrifice on behalf of your children. I'd love for you to talk to the moms who feel like I would love to be making more financial progress, but I'm just too busy taking care of everybody else, and maybe why that mindset needs to shift.
This is a great topic. As a mom of 6 who has been through the experience of, oh, everything is for my kids, right? Like you realize, and I say this to my clients, the fastest way to derail a budget is to have some kids, right? It is because you get into this mode of just wanting to give and give and give without setting up for yourself. And thankfully, so I'm married. My husband and I have been together for 17 years. But even with that, as a mom, you still feel like you're in this, like, I must give because I didn't have, and I must, even when sometimes your partner doesn't agree. And that can cause its own set of issues. So I'm fortunate in that my husband and I pretty early realized, like, listen, we love these kids, but one day they're going to leave us. And so we have to make sure that we're preparing as much for ourselves as we can. And it's okay to tell them no. So we went through some years of being what I call a needs-based family. So when you need new sneakers, I will buy you new sneakers. I'm not buying you new sneakers because the new Jordans dropped, because that $200 can be used for something in your future that you don't even know is coming. I also try to really instill in my kids the value of a dollar. So we talk about the fact that groceries are not free. They show up in this house because your parents work, and then we go to the store and we trade a portion of our paycheck for groceries. My kids have chores, and they have to learn that level of responsibility so that they understand and don't become like entitled. I think it's hard because we are the generation of curse breakers. We're the pivot generation to me. We're the ones who recognize while our parents did the best they could, they made a ton of mistakes, and they were not very good at being open and loving and building us up in productive ways. So we're trying to make up for that with our children, but we have to make sure we don't go too far the other direction. I'll give a good example when it comes to like college, right? I know there are parents out here breaking the bank to make sure that their kids can go to whatever college they want to go to. I do not subscribe to that. When my kids were 7, each one of them, as they turned 7 years old, we started having conversations about college. And we're clear, you can go to college, you can start your life, or you can go and pursue a trade, because you need to know that this is not a one-trick pony. When I came up, college was the only option. I don't want my kids to think that. That's number one. Number two, if you go to college, you have 3 flavors. You've got community college, you've got state college, and you have private college. If you go to community college or state college in North Carolina, where I'm located, mommy and daddy will pay every cent, and we will give you the gift of a debt-free education. That is our commitment to every one of our children. If you decide to go to a private university because you love the prestige or whatever else attracted you to that school, here is the financial limit your father and I are willing to contribute. And any dollar above that, let's go and seek every scholarship we can, because there are millions of dollars that go unaccounted for every year in scholarship applications. I will help you with that, but I'm not leveraging my house. I'm not taking on a second mortgage. I'm not liquidating my life insurance or my 401k to help you go to school, because there is no loan program for my retirement, and I don't want to depend on you in those days.
I freaking love this, because this is a mindset that I think especially first generation parents need to be having, the ones who are like serious about breaking that generational curse. Like, the best gift you can give your kids is knowing that they do not have to worry about you financially, because so many of us are in that position right now where we're just like, this is for real. Like, we're really going to have to be out here planning to help our parents financially, caretakers, and nobody prepared us for this.
There's no
There you go.
handbook. I'm doing it right now. My mom lives with me right now, and my sister. I have a sister that has developmental delays. I have both of them living with me. There's no handbook. There's
There
no
really
handbook.
isn't.
Yeah.
Oof, that's rough. Let's dive into that a little bit more, because that's such an area of stress for people. Like, I've had people come up to me crying, like, what do I do in this scenario where I know I am my parents' retirement plan? I know that I'm going to have to financially contribute to helping my family survive. And it's a lot.
Yeah, well, so I'll tell you, my husband and I, we bought a bigger house, so that we really bought the bigger house for my kids, right? Like, oh, we've got 2 kids in college. Let's buy a bigger house so that neither one of them have to come home and go share a room in their high school bedroom. So we were fortunate. We found a house that had an apartment in the basement, full apartment. Well, a month later, my mom has to come live with us. And I was like, you know what? Okay, God. So we bought this thinking that this was the reason, but you had a different reason that we didn't even know. Cool. Mom comes. My mom has no assets. She has no retirement money. So she is now on she's a part of my payroll, right? Like, it just is what it is. Similarly, my sister. And so my mom came to my house with a suitcase, right? Like, that's all her possessions in the world. And you think about it from like, man, what a simple way to live. Like, it's kind of interesting to think about. But then at the same time, you're like, but man, someone else really has to plan and provide for you. And even like my brother and I, like, we're planning for like the day that my mom is no longer here. How do we want to financially address that? Right? Because funerals are not free. So we're preparing now for that time, because it's going to be on us.
It's basically a line item in your budget, the same way that your kids are.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's what we have to see it as, right? Because it's easy to be angry and to be resentful and to be like in those feelings of, well, why didn't you do better? Why am I having to be the one to deal with this? I'm a firm believer that you are never given more than you can bear. And I also am a believer that it's almost like it's a privilege to even be able to extend that support. You know, I consider myself very lucky to be able to even factor that into what I'm doing financially, of just preparing to help my parents. And it is what it is. It's like the sooner we accept the reality and the sooner that we understand what that level of support is too, because I think that's really important as well. Just to understand, like, are you going to have to provide room and board? Are you going to just have to give like a monthly allowance? Are you going to help them buy a piece of real estate that they can live in, maybe back home, like in, your home country? There's a lot of different ways to extend that support. And I think the first step is really just, you need to have conversations. You need to really understand, like, what is the actual situation? What assets do you have? What debt do you have? What is the plan? And I think oftentimes we avoid those conversations because, it forces you to confront mortality and the fact that life is going to be more challenging. But also at the same time, if you ignore the issue when it actually does confront you and you're unprepared, I think it makes it 10 times worse.
Yeah, it does. I think from a Christian perspective, it's an honor to be able to provide for your parents in their old age. Now, obviously, we have to prepare for that financially. So there's an adjustment that needs to be made for me, I think it works because when you have as many people in your household as I do, adding two more doesn't really make a difference. Like, I'm already cooking ginormous pots of rice and beans. Like, it's already there. Right. So I think for someone, I think about people who are like only children who have to take on their parents. That to me is a different ball game than me, who has a husband, 6 children. Taking on my mom and my sister is kind of like welcome to the fold. And because my mom didn't have any assets, but she also didn't have any debt, which is a blessing. This might sound weird, but it's like adding another child, right, to my life. But for someone who has a parent who and my mom is really like, she's kind of really humble and like low key and easygoing. But if you've got parents who are more boisterous and come with debt and responsibilities that you didn't expect to have to take on, I can see where that can lead to a lot of tension. I kind of picked up my mom and was like, this is it. You're coming to North Carolina. That was
Yeah. Executive decision.
Yeah, you don't have a choice in it. But there are people who are dealing with parents who got clapback. Like, they've got like back talk, and you're kind of like, no, I'm the boss now, like,
Yeah.
but they're still the parent. And so there's a respect factor that has to happen. We do need to start having these conversations much earlier, especially if your parents have assets. What's the game plan? Are you going to set up a trust? Who's going to be the beneficiaries of the trust? Who's going to be the executor of your will? All of these things are conversations that people need to have when you have parents who actually have those things that you have to worry about: assets, living wills, long-term care plans. Like, what is your directive, medical directive, like all of that. For me, I'm the one making all of those decisions for my mom. She doesn't really get an input because of where she is in age and health, and everyone's not that fortunate to have like full control.
Yeah. And, that's why the conversation around personal finance has to be way beyond the budgeting and the saving and the basic stuff. Like you said, it has to be, we're thinking about the holistic picture because this is a journey and you will be confronting different aspects of this money journey as you grow, as you have a family, as you take on future responsibilities, as you go from career to entrepreneur. There's just a lot of things to think about. And so I would love to know from you, Lilias, now being on this other side, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to your pre-awakened self when it comes to money?
Girl, if I knew then at 19, when I got that inheritance, if I knew then what I know now, I would have probably never had to work a day in my life. Like, I did the math to look back and see, like, I bought my first MacBook in 2004. If I would have taken my 60,000 and dumped it into Apple stock instead of buying that
girl.
MacBook, like, I would have never had to work. Like, never. I also think because I went to a private university, ended up paying for college, like, if I would have known what I knew now, I would have went to community college from the beginning. I would have got my degree. So I ended up leaving Hofstra because I ran out of money, and I ended up going to community college anyway. And then I went to an Ivy League school. So this idea that if you go to community college, you can't have a great outcome is nonsense. Like, I'm the poster child. I went to Hunter College in New York City, and then I went to Columbia University for my master's. So you don't have to think that that's a deterrent or somehow you're not going to end up with a great career, making great money, living a great life.
Yeah. Oh man. Until we have the ability to travel back in time, I think the best that we can do here, y'all, is give you all the advice that we wish we'd had. And hopefully, if it's not too late for you, it's not too late for your kids. It's not too late for the next generation. We want to set them up for success and not continue to repeat the same mistakes that we may have made in the past.
Yes. Oh man.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda. But you know what? I think all of our hardships, all of the things that we've had to overcome definitely set us up to now be in a place where we have that perspective. We're on the other side and we can say with confidence, like, I worked to get here and I'm very proud of everything that I've accomplished. I know people are going to be so inspired by this conversation and want to find out more about you, your financial stylist. Tell us all the things. Where can we find you? And you have this awesome quiz on your website where people can find out their financial style, which I'm going to take that quiz like right now.
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Your Financial Stylist. I'm on Twitter too, or X as they call it now, and I'm YF Stylist on there. But those are my main platforms. I also go live every Monday on Instagram where I answer any money question anyone has. Mondays at usually 1:30 on IG, which is a fun time. I want to say one thing, Janice, just about, because I know when we get here on the other side and haven't had made mistakes and learning from our mistakes and wanting to do better, even as a parent who teaches personal finance, the possibility of having a child who just refuses to learn and want to do things the hard way can become a reality. And we have to be prepared for that as well. We have to know that as parents, it doesn't matter how well we try to prepare our children and have them not repeat the same mistakes. We have to accept the reality that they may. And if they do, it's still okay, right? They can bounce back too. So I want to put that out there too, because I know a lot of parents are like, and they're going to live this, totally different life. And we hope maybe, but it's not guaranteed.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things that is the superpower, if you will, of first gen kids, of folks like us, it's this resilience that I believe comes from ancestral DNA. We have survived colonization, racism, and everything else in between. And we're still here and we're still managing to find ways to thrive despite all of that. And so I think at the end of the day, it's important to realize that regardless of where you come from, what you've been through, you do have the power to change your life. And it really starts with doing something different, surrounding yourself with people who also have that mindset of change and growth, and especially getting around awesome women of color like Lilias, who are really empowering us to think beyond the struggle and to know that you can create the reality that you want.
Yeah, with God's help.
Absolutely. Tell us how you work with folks as well as a money coach for anybody who's interested in working with you.
Yeah, so right now, the main thing that I'm doing, I have this year-long biblical finance and financial literacy program. It just started in July, so I'm not accepting anyone else into the program right now, but I will open it again in January of 2025. So that is a live, twice a month live training, and then a weekly accountability call so you're getting equipped on the training sessions, and then you're practicing it through the accountability where we meet every week and talk about the reality of what's happening with your budget. What was your plan for this month? Did you do it? Did you reduce? You said last month your eating out budget was too high. You spent too much. Did you adjust that for this month? And etc. So it's a great program so far. Right now, most of the time, for between now and when I reopen that course in January, right now, I'm just open to answering people's questions. So people can meet with me one-on-one. I do virtual coffee conversations if they have a personal finance question that they don't want to ask publicly on Instagram. And I'll meet with them for 15 minutes and hear their story. I'll pray with them if they want prayer. And I'll give them a solution, like a quick win for their financial situation that they can implement right away. And of course, my workbook is really that foundation, that money mindset foundation, which is really what everyone needs before they start working hand in hand with a coach on this is what you need to change, because they need to understand why they need to change certain things before we begin.
Absolutely. And you have a book as well, correct?
Yes, it's called Your Financial Style Guide. So it's the practical guide to managing money God's way.
Amazing. Lilias, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for inspiring us. And thank you for being an OG, a pioneer in this personal finance space, because we cannot have enough incredible voices like yours who are empowering us to make better decisions with our money. So thank you for the work that you do and for leading the charge.
So welcome. And thank you. Listen, you are a pioneer in your own right in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to just sit alongside you and have this conversation. So thank you as well.
Thank you so much.